Welcome to Be Growth Driven. Audrey here. I am your hostess with the mostest today. And today's topic is definitely about growth, personal and business. So we want to welcome to the stage today, Samantha Roberts. And let me get her pulled up here and we're going to talk side by side. Samantha, thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. So our show usually includes a variety of guests, some connected to us in the 10X industry and some not. But today, yes, you are a Grant Cardone licensee. We met you through the 10X community. And I do want to share real quick before we ask you a little bit more about your bio. I saw you at GrowthCon 4. And when I first met you recently, I said I regret not saying hello to you because I saw you every single day. And do I remember right? Did you attend by yourself at GrowthCon 4 in Vegas?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I'm like, that takes a lot of courage and a mission for someone to do that. Show up in a place at a huge conference by yourself. And I regret not meeting you sooner. So I'm glad we get to do this together. So if you can tell the people a little bit more about yourself before we dive into a little bit more intense conversation.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm kind of new to the entrepreneurial space, the personal development space. I was corporate analyst for the entirety of my career. I loved being, the problem solver, the change management agent for, all these internationally renowned brands. And I loved that side of it. And I was so focused on showing up powerfully in that corporate space, in that corporate umbrella, and just being that person who solved any problem that was thrown my way and just be able to, bring order to or chaos to order was kind of like that place that I loved to dabble in and play with. But the problem was I didn't have any personal self-worth or value. So if they needed me 15, 18 hours a day, I gave it to them. And there was no life balance. There was no beautiful, self-awareness that really existed. And that came out of, just suffering for a decade in chronic pain after multiple accidents. And being out in New York City on my own when I come from a tiny little town in Oregon of 8,500 people. And so I have this desire to go do big things, but not necessarily the independent self-worth that might be required to do really well in it. Now, I was, growing rapidly in that career space, and I became, the youngest executive in my last organization. I was 32 years old, managing the sales planning for $1 billion division. I was very proud of that, but I didn't exist as a person. And when I found the 10X community in October 2019, it was the same month that I also had my life-saving surgeries. And so I had this complete catastrophic event in my life, but I was supported at the same time by the most beautiful community. And accountability weekly on our weekly calls and on our daily chats. And I think it just transformed my awareness of what's possible. You can be a high achiever and also have self-worth versus that corporate mindset is diminish yourself and disappear a little bit so that you fit a mold, so that you satisfy a quota. And for me, it's just been this beautiful exploration over the last year and a half to find myself, my point of view, and my contribution. And it turns out my greatest contribution is through voice. Awesome. And that's kind of how I started hosting my podcast and interviews.
Yes, storytelling by the numbers. And you ask, I've heard your interview with Joel, you ask amazing questions, you get to the heart of it, and you have a beautiful way of doing it. So that's why I want to share a bit more about that today on Be Growth Driven. I shouldn't have been surprised when I saw that you were in the fashion industry in New York City. Because when I first saw you, you were very fashionable. I thought you were from Europe. I'm like, that is a European woman right there. Because you look like out of a movie. And I'm like, oh, I should have known fashion industry. So when you had your surgeries, it was basically like transformation time in every area. It wasn't just there.
It was a complete dismantling of the life I had known. And honestly, when you're surrounded by so many growth-driven people every single day, in that virtual digital economy before it's normalized across, even the corporate space, right? This is pre-2020. And I was just noticing every single day, everyone I was in contact with was leveling up, trying new things and not being afraid if they had an opportunity that it might not work out. right?
Yeah.
Because every failure became a lesson, and we started to just fill our toolboxes with, okay, here's an opportunity or an experience where I dove deep into something. Here's where it worked and here's where it didn't, but here's who I met along the way. And I
Hmm.
just started seeing that with more and more commonality. And I thought for me that was just so beautiful, that you don't have to just fill a role. You can dabble in new things on a regular basis until you
Right.
find the right thing. Versus, I think, as so many of us as adults, we live in a space where an opportunity is presented and you kind of trust that it's the only one. There's that organic
Yeah.
scarcity that happens with modern society where you just are kind of concerned, well, if this presented, what are the odds that I'm going to get another thing like this? So
Right. You
let me
can
go all in.
take it now. It might be the only
Yeah.
opportunity you get. How fake life is lived. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not always true in real life. And until
Hmm.
you take those chances, you don't realize that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Awesome. Awesome. So you found, how can I ask how, that's something I like to find out. How did you find out about or be introduced to 10X?
So it started with me in um, well, 2016, I spent 7 months traveling around Europe. I hadn't stopped working in years. In 2.5 years, I had not taken more than 24, 48 hours off, because that's when I really dug deep into corporate America. And I had this
Yeah.
opportunity to travel around Europe for, it was supposed to be a full year, but I only ended up staying for 7 months. I went all over, primarily by myself, backpacking, just
Ooh.
next flight out, next train out, whatever happened to
Yeah.
be available. And when I came back, I just really, that was my first dip into personal development and being aware that like entrepreneurs can just go travel, because I was continually meeting entrepreneurs from all across the world
Yeah.
who, whether they were some level of creative or business operations, they were able to conduct themselves internationally, instantaneously, connect with everyone. I thought it was really beautiful. So when I came back, it was right before the holiday season, which in corporate America, nobody hires. Everybody's off for, November and December, and I got back Halloween. So I started just digging into Brendan Burchard's material, and I
Mhm.
started reading his books. And then, when you get on Audible or Kindle, you get suggestions, and then 10X Rule was shared with
Oh,
me.
okay.
And so that's kind of how it started. But there's so many other layers to, my introduction to Tony Robbins a few years later,
Yeah.
and then um, in September, right before I joined the 10X community, I reached out to Elena and started to get to know her. And I said, I have this idea. I kind of want to do a podcast. And she's like, just do it,
Just do it. Yeah.
and it just happened organically that Grant launched his mentorship program the next month.
Perfect. So you joined that.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, our first going to GrowthCon was on GrowthCon 2, and there was the ambassadors program. So there's always
Uh-huh.
different opportunities to get into it and go the next level. Because I mean, reading the book is one thing, but
Hmm.
implementing some of the practices and really dipping your toes in is totally different. So that's awesome. Um, One of the things I wanted to ask you about is in your bio. You gave us a great bio, and I need to put it up here in the chat. Storytelling by the Numbers is your podcast, and one of the things you said was through the power of community and mentorship through Grant Cardone, you found your voice again, which you've shared with us a little bit here, and
Hmm.
conviction to live a life of contribution and service. So, a little bit more about how the community and mentorship has helped you. How did that mentorship itself, that program, benefit you when you were first
Yeah.
starting out?
It was definitely the regularity of meeting every single week. So I
Mm-hmm.
had, obviously, in corporate, I had a very high stress position, running the financial month closures and the strategy and all that. So Grant and Brandon Dawson immediately took interest in what I was doing in corporate. And so by the fourth week of that program, they had called me up to do a hot seat. And so I
Oh,
immediately started getting just a lot more attention and direction from Sherry, from Jared, from Brandon, from
nice.
Grant. And it just kind of kicked it off where I was more and more engaged. And then more of the community started reaching out directly to me. They're like, you don't speak up a lot, but when you do, you've got something to say.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, it's kind of this beautiful awakening for me to realize that you can have an expertise in your corporate life, but you've got people who just want you to pull yourself out more. They can see you. And I think that's what I really started to lean into, is the fact that when people have awareness of greatness or of good opportunity, they pull it out of you. Not because they
Mm-hmm.
want something from you, but because they know that when everybody is firing on all cylinders, we all get better.
Yes.
And I definitely had that with regularity with this community. And, shortly after joining Grant's community, I also joined quite a few others, and I started
Mhm.
getting that every minute of every day that I wasn't, pouring into corporate. And so I had this beautiful balance of the high stress in corporate, but more and more this empowerment that was coming into my world. And when you have that with consistency and regularity, you really pull on yourself. Am
Yeah.
I showing up with everything that I have? Do
Yeah.
I actually have more to give? Can I serve harder? And I think I really started to do the good inventory of my life and say, okay, any of these blockages that I have, what can I start working through? Who can I start bringing closer into my ecosystem so that I'm actually accountable to those changes? And what else am I bringing to everybody else in the community? It's not
Yes.
enough to just be poured into. You need to give back. That reciprocity is absolutely everything. You feel yourself grow, you feel the community grow, and you do it selflessly. I think that's the greatest thing I've learned in this facet of my life is just being around people who just give and serve.
Hmm. Yeah. You don't get that. You don't get that a lot of other places.
No.
And people who are quick to say, what can I do to help you when they see a need or a concern? I know, yeah, that happens often. You get a text or a phone call right when you need it to help boost you up. You also talked about having conviction or purpose. We talk a lot about purpose, especially with Miriam, a previous guest we have. We talk a lot about that. Um, how did the conviction, obviously you had it geared toward corporate. How did you have to change that gear or adjust that, and how so in this new venture in life?
I think I started noticing so much that, there are a lot of incredibly brilliant business owners who don't have a lot of structure. And so what I started leaning into is like understanding and appreciating what corporate gifted me, right? In corporate, we put you in a box so that you can function for a piece of the business. And we know with certainty that you'll always satisfy that need. And I
Mhm.
noticed with entrepreneurship and small businesses, you're a jack of all trades.
Yes.
And so often you don't necessarily know what the next linchpin in your business could be. You don't know what the next amplifier could be. And so I started just, being that curious evaluator and change management agent that I was in corporate. I started to just have these really organic conversations with my entrepreneurial friends and be like, what if you XYZ? What if we added this structure? And I think for me, being able to just see the awakening and the awareness light up in somebody when they're like, oh, I could do it that way, and just see how it created new opportunity in those businesses. And I think I started seeing that there was a way for me to be a bridge, right?
Right.
And of course, during this whole time, I'm like going through my own personal awakening, my own personal development. And so there's so many elements along the way that brought me forward.
Hmm.
But I think what for me was so powerful was just seeing that my natural inclination to find a way. And I'll say it just like that, just find a way. No matter what your challenge, opportunity, or hardship might be, there's always a way. And so I started to lean more and more into that. Well, okay, so if you're facing this challenge in your business, what if we didn't add a what? What if we added a who? And that led me down the path of finding your zone of genius. And this is what I talk about so much on Storytelling by the Numbers. When, as a founder or a leader or an author, you know what you specialize in and you learn that you can outsource everything else that does not serve you in that zone of genius, it opens you up to have even greater contribution just from that space. And think about the people who then in your ecosystem get to elevate and launch into their area of expertise because you let go of something that they can now pick up.
Hmm.
They're able to grow and expand their business because they have another stream of income and impact that they're able to have access to. And so on the show, I talk about so much about that zone of genius, about outsourcing everything that doesn't serve you so that you can serve powerfully from the gift and the toolbox that you've received.
That's excellent. And it creates its own ecosystem basically
Yes.
where everybody's, and I love what you said about entrepreneurs too. I mean, they are jack of all trades. It is he that I can't even imagine the stark difference you went through just changing from corporate to
Right.
to where you are now, because I gradually tiptoed and changed but to change overnight, it is a huge difference. Huge difference. One of the other things I wanted to focus on, I know you talk a lot about this, it's close to your heart, about contributing to the community and the goals you have moving forward in your business growth. As a licensee, I know that touched your heart to want to add to a community and a legacy. Can you share some more about that?
Yeah. So this definitely dips back into that corporate inclination that I had. I always worked with legacy brands. It was very intentional when I left my tiny Oregon town and went to New York City. I wanted to work with legacy brands. I wanted to
Can
work
you
with
name drop? You worked for some amazing companies. That's why I was like,
um,
really? I should have looked sooner at your LinkedIn.
oh my gosh, yeah. So it's been an incredible journey. I've helped my very first opportunity under
Like this,
yeah.
maybe? Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, a little Kanique Estee Lauder, a little MAC Cosmetics, a little Tommy Hilfiger and Van Cleef& and Arpels, a little Bulgari. Yes, the list goes on, but there are
Yes.
so many incredible stories and opportunities to be a part of legacy building.
Yeah.
And if at the core I was going to be a part of legacy building, when I entered the entrepreneurial community, I wanted to know who had legacy in it already. And if I was going to take a stance in it and come be a big proponent of this industry, who do I need to learn from so that I know that I'm learning from today's greats with lasting legacy in the forefront? Not someone who's going to be a flash in the pan. I didn't want to learn from leaders who were simply going to come, make a lot of noise, and exit. When
Right.
I saw that Grant Cardone was really launching his licensee program, that created a platform where I'm not only tapping into the good work he's done for decades, but also by joining in October 2019, that was the transitional year for him and the way that he was
Mhm.
conducting his growth within his business. The texture of his relationships changed within his customers and clientele. And I wanted to be a part of that. And I noticed that, if you can bring sales training and systems and structure to the entrepreneurships across the world, and you can have it come from the place of community first and
Mhm.
blend it in with my zone of genius methodologies, where I'm really thinking about when you specialize in who you are and you look at your own experience and your own toolbox and your own life, what can be your contribution? And then he did this beautiful amplification in the last year where he added his Grant Cardone Foundation. And that for me was like the final piece to click into place,
Mm.
because now it really ties into the human capital, the human capacity side of life,
Yeah.
right? Understanding how you give back and how, when I look at a lot of these legacy leaders that I learned from in the last year, Grant Cardone, Tony Robbins, Dean Graziosi, and so many others, and I'm looking at what they're now doing with their free time, with their spare money.
Hmm.
Tony Robbins donates $1 million a month. For his 60th birthday, he hosted a birthday party with his friends, and they raised almost $20 million for a great cause. When I thought about, okay, if I leave corporate America and I'm going to go into the entrepreneurial space, I want to be a part of something that has a legacy and lasting impact.
Hmm.
And when you have this ability to really just now, I'm getting greater clarity on what I want to be known for and be a part of. And first, it starts with that licensee, but then it starts with creating my own movement and creating my own, stake in the game, which is launching in the
Yeah.
next month, which, hopefully we'll do a follow up when that does
Yeah.
launch, because it's very exciting for me because it's bringing that legacy and community together. It's bringing that idea of outsourcing what's not in your zone of genius and
Hmm.
creating that global ecosystem, like we've touched on briefly throughout this conversation, and bringing it to the forefront
Hmm.
where you can just trust that you're in the right community of people, that no matter what it is you want to tackle, do, or provide to the world, you've got the right team, the right community,
Yes.
the right network to get it done.
Yes. Absolutely. I love that. Again, when you speak, it's impactful, Samantha. Very impactful. Now, I know with your podcast, you have, I want to make sure I get this right. Courageous Conversations. Is that part of the podcast?
It's what I just call the essence of what happens during those interviews.
Gotcha.
So it's just so raw and real when I get these entrepreneurs, thought
Mhm.
leaders, and authors into a Zoom room and we just have this incredible engagement. Because, like you've noticed with me, I do have a lot of intensity, maybe in the way that I pose my questions, the way that I respond. And I think that's been really powerful. For me, that came from what we haven't alluded to about during this whole interview is I was nonverbal for 12 years. And so it made me into, a listener. It made me into an observer. It made me into somebody who really sees what somebody isn't saying and understands the meaning behind it. And when you bring that into an interview capacity and space,
Mm-hmm.
it opens up so much of the depth of the conversation and be able like, what is also here that we can dabble in and play with, right? Because I think a
Yeah.
conversation it's agile, it's fluid, it's emotional, and what's really powerful about it is when I'm in these one-on-ones with all these leaders, I'm able to see what their zone of genius is, and we get to just bring that out and highlight it. And I know that my listeners are getting something powerful out of that because I've walked away from the end of the interview and they've said, I've never been asked that kind of question before. I've never
Mm-hmm.
talked about it in that way. Or you do something different with voice. And I love that because,
Yeah.
again, as someone who's only had my voice for about a year and a half, and knowing now that I was hiding that zone of genius from the world for such a long period of time, it feels so good to know that I'm in my element, I'm in my
Mm-hmm.
space, and I'm doing what's right for me.
Yeah. You found your niche. You found your spot.
Yeah.
Now, is it fair enough to say that when you lose one ability, the others are honed in? Like, do you read people better or in a different way than others do? Because I know we have a fast paced life
Yeah.
and it's go, go, go. But
Mm-hmm.
perhaps from the angle of your experience, it helped you. Do you pull things out of people during these courageous conversations that they don't even expect or know? Has that happened?
It
Aha
has.
moments?
It has, and I think I really honed the level of it through that capacity I filled in corporate America. I was direct to senior leadership all the time, and I was dealing with high emotion and high intensity at every hour of every day. And for me to be nonverbal and to be, even keel, low emotion, and be able to just sit in observance and complete expertise when it came to data and storytelling, I was able to really just observe when somebody's in their zone of genius, in their greatness, in that boardroom capacity, you see how the rest of the business and the rest of the team comes into play. And when I started to have these conversations with entrepreneurs, it was so incredible because I see their intensity, I see their heart, I see their drive. And then it's like, how can we, amplify it? How can we play with it? How can we bring it forward just a little bit more? And I think what's been so impactful about it is that when we get done, just watching their body go, wow, and just lean into it and the unlocking that has taken place.
Yeah.
And, the tears sometimes that flow, it's because we've touched on something that was beautiful that they want to bring back. And then when I check in later, I discover that, something was reignited in them that they can now, bring back into their world because so often in that fast paced life that you alluded to, we
Yeah.
forget what makes us great.
Yeah.
We forget what makes us really, really impactful to our community and what we can bring to others. And I think one of the big things that I stand for is holding space for others to be heard. Think of how many of us rush so much in life and have so little concern for our own need. We put everybody else first. Imagine when you're able to just sit with someone, have a courageous conversation, and they feel you, they hear you, they hold space for you, and they remind you of who you are at the core before you gave it away for everything else that needed you first.
Yeah. That doesn't happen too often in the day to day life.
Yeah.
Those impactful moments or conversations happen. Sad to say, when you're really fast paced, sometimes once every 6 months,
Yeah.
sometimes once a month. It depends who you're talking to and who that person is you're connecting with. So that is a beautiful gift you have. I'm sure you might be thinking about it. I don't know all the plans coming out in the next month, but I think personal coaching would be absolutely something that you would be excellent at. Excellent.
Appreciate that.
I
I
don't know if that's
appreciate
the
that because I
plan.
think, in corporate, being that guide was so much of what I did because it's high stress, high intensity all the time. And I'm coming in as a change agent. Think of how many ruffled feathers happen when new technology is brought into a company. or
Yeah.
when global disruption happens, as it did for all of us in the last year. So
Yeah.
yes, definitely for me, with as strongly as I'm pulled to community enrichment, and as much as I've grown through one-on-one communication and engagement in the last year, it is absolutely my mission. More people need to know and trust back into themselves that they can do what they put their mind to and what they put their heart to.
Hmm.
For me, I just think it's so impactful to be able to, lean into ourselves and make sure that we take this opportunity for the reset and
Yeah.
not go back to the before. For me, there's no going back to the before. I could never go back to the person who sits in a boardroom day in and day out. Yes, on my 48-inch gaming monitor because I love data and I love to dig in and it was a game for me. But I could never go back to that zero, zero connection life that I
Yeah.
had. Could never go
Yeah.
back. And the intensity of the courageous conversations into my life in the last year and a half, I mean, once you hold space with that much regularity and you see yourself awaken and uplift with such regularity, it's hard to ever imagine turning that off. So now it's become this amplification. I got to get more people into
Yeah.
this space.
Absolutely. And we hope they find you by watching Be Growth Driven and can reach out if they have not already connected with you. So we always try to emulate GrowthCon. Our guests, you must have loved GrowthCon 5. There was some great representation of their Swan Sit, not only knowing her professional corporate side, but then hearing her insights and just she's a beautiful soul. It was just
Mm,
amazing. But I was like, you probably knew some of those people before we realized who they were and what contribution they have to business, to
mm,
our image of branding that we see. So
mm.
yeah, as I really do think if you're not doing coaching, you should think about that. Because even just the branding part of things, being a part of huge brands like that, you have a lot of insight.
Yeah,
But more the heart of it, getting
yeah.
to that. I love it. But in true GrowthCon fashion, what does 10X mean to you, Samantha?
For me, it's just amplification of self and contribution. I awakened in this community, and I know that so many of my peers have as well, right? You can have excellence in your world in your own vision of it. But when you have thousands of people weekly pouring into you and showcasing what excellence means to you, you constantly refine it. You constantly dig deeper into who you are, and you realize that there's never a point when you've stopped growing, and you never will stop growing. And I think it creates this amazing comfortability that you're never done, you're never complacent, and you're never finished. And so for me, 10X has just really been about constant and consistent growth.
Love it. Absolutely. Many would agree with you, but I love that. Thank you for joining us today. To find Samantha, you can find her on Facebook at Samantha Roberts, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Make sure we get that in here. And in the next month, pay attention. She's launching something big. So if there's more avenues or locations to find her at, you will find it there on her Facebook page. So thank you, Samantha. I'll close us out. Stay backstage for just a moment when we're done. Everybody, thank you for joining us. Next week on Be Growth Driven, same bat time, same bat place. We will be having William Figaro. I hope that's right. I call him Wi-Fi. I'm like, that's not his full name. But another member of our 10X community, he'll be joining us next week. So make sure you tune in and join to hear about what drives his growth, what has been a motivation for him. Always golden nuggets, no matter what industry you're in, no matter what stage in life you're at, everybody, no one's done growing. No one's done growing. Everybody can benefit. So join us next week for Be Growth Driven. And until then, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next week.